So, hello everyone. Welcome to RT7 Digital's vendor profitability webinar. My name is Jack Cooper. I'm commercial director, one of the founding members of RT7 Digital. We also have Stephen Lloyd, who heads up our Amazon strategist team on the call today. Um, RT7 Digital, we've been specializing in Amazon for 10 years now, but we've invested a lot over the last 3 to 4 years into our vendor central expertise and also service offerings relating directly to Amazon Vendor Central. Saw there to be an opportunity as that as a key point of difference. I think vendor as a platform, for those that sell via Vendor Central now, will know the pains that come with that Vendor Central relationship. So we want to just share as much knowledge as we can, and we're always here to support as well for any more hands-on conversations. So we're gonna run through some content today. Stephen's going to take us through those slides. And any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box you can see there. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available to watch via our YouTube channel, and we'll also be sharing it on other socials as well. And then at the end of the presentation, we will have a pause before we end to answer any questions and have a bit more of an interactive session there. So I hope that you find everything we covered today useful, insightful, things you haven't necessarily heard. And I'll hand over to Stephen to get cracking.
Great, thanks, Jack. So as discussed, this is going to be around Amazon Vendor and the big challenge that is profitability, which is, I know, a challenge for almost everybody that has a vendor account and a challenge in general with Amazon. So starting right at the top of the problem, why do vendors struggle with profitability? There are obviously many things that make up the overall profitability of a vendor account, but starting from the top, co-op fees and deductions. So this is any terms that you have on the account. So your co-op, the standard marketing co-op allowances, your overstock allowance, damage allowance. Anybody with a vendor account will have seen they tend to like to have several different agreements. Usually most years they want to up it by 1% or 2%, and you get margin erosion. You might go in, start at say 10% across your terms, and they bring in another one, they tweak some of the margins, suddenly you're up to 12%, 15%, and you find that that margin just slowly starts to get eroded over time. And we'll get into what can be done about that and some of the common things that Amazon does to try and attack that, and what some of the things we recommend are within that. Margin control. So this is Amazon is constantly looking to squeeze profits. So Jeff Bezos once famously said, their margin is my opportunity, which just gives you an idea around what Amazon's general attitude is towards the people that use the platform and how they tend to look at your margins. So the things Amazon does there is looking at the price that you provide to them, always looking for that to go down. And if you've been through annual negotiations, that's often something that comes up, is that they'll want that price to be decreased going forward. And often they'll even look to scrape that back over time. Suppressed offers that will appear in the account where Amazon will say, we to be able to place future POs for this, we need a price decrease. I'll go over a bit some of the things that Amazon does with that beyond just taking the discount there going forward. And of course, increased operational costs, and in certain cases, just the operational costs from shipping to lots of different locations, having to handle small orders, having to handle Amazon ordering in random quantities. Then, of course, marketing expenses. Amazon is a very competitive space in terms of advertising. You always want to see the most in terms of your ROI, in terms of your advertising. Inventory management. So with this, Amazon obviously doesn't hold huge levels of stock a lot of the time. And I know very recently a lot of people have been noticing Amazon holding less stock than usual, and that's resulted in lower PO numbers recently for a lot of companies. So the inventory piece there. And then back onto really the price piece. So this ties back into the tight margin control of Amazon looking to pull down price. It's always hard to then get that price increase back up again. And changing priorities. And this is a landscape piece and one that a lot of vendors have felt over the last year or so, especially. And there's been, I know, a mass closure of vendor accounts, especially the smaller vendor accounts or the lower profitability vendor accounts for Amazon have seen that they've actually lost that account entirely. And the other challenge that a lot of those smaller ones face is that they don't have necessarily a vendor manager, they don't have an AVS, there's nobody there to effectively there's no one there that they can go to directly and try and appeal anything with Amazon. It's all through the algorithm, through the system, and it's all very cold, clinical, and usually just results in a lot of no from Amazon. So that's the areas that people tend to struggle in. So what does it look like to try and combat those things? So negotiation. So right back at the top there, going over the fees and deductions, there are always going to be co-op fees on Amazon, and Amazon is always going to come in saying that they want an increase in their fee, or there's a new thing that they want to add in. And sometimes there is a use to adding in a new fee. It might be that you are doing a lot of different distributions around either just this country or across Europe, and you look at a Pix plan or a Super Pix. It might be that you finally want to get an AVS manager and you add in the percentage for that. In general, though, when Amazon comes in wanting an increase in percentage, it's generally not to your benefit, it's generally to theirs because it's going to squeeze your margin further. And they will attack this in a few different ways. Sometimes they will just say, we need this to be able to continue. Sometimes it will just be that you have a pop up on your vendor account that says new terms are available for you to view, and you get told you've got 2 weeks to accept it. And nobody really talks to you about it. So I'll start off at kind of that end of the spectrum, which will be the smaller vendors or the vendor accounts that have just over time, vendor managers have stepped away and no new vendor manager has come in. If you have an account where Amazon just every year, or it may not even be every year, but when you get to the point of annual terms, you get a pop up on your account that says new terms are available. You go to them, they've increased by 0.5%, 1%. You don't have to just accept those. So they've put that 2 week deadline for you to do it, but we don't really see Amazon really ever try to enforce that. So if you go beyond that 2 weeks, there's no inherent penalty that comes with it. What I generally recommend to any company where you get just a notification saying these are the terms and there's just an increase in cost, or even if it's just a decrease in cost prices, I'll go over that a little bit separately in a second, or the cost price piece. Let's say you've got marketing and they want to go from 5 to 6%. You don't just have to accept it. You can push back on this, and a lot of the time Amazon won't even respond to that pushback, and you can just leave your terms where they are. And that's kind of my advice to the smaller vendor accounts where they are at the moment, is you can kind of fly a little bit under the radar of Amazon in that sense. If there are terms you want to change, then that's going to be more that you need to fly deliberately above the radar to get their attention. But there is never a guarantee you will get a decrease, especially if you are one of those smaller vendors. So when you go into your terms and you see that they're after an increase, there's an email button at the bottom. I usually just recommend put something along the lines of, I want to understand more about why this is needed, happy to discuss, but as a wider discussion on account profitability. 9 times out of 10, no one will come back to you, and you will just sit with the same terms on the account as you already had. In that one time that they do come back, you get a discussion. You don't just have a clinical click here and accept. You get to negotiate, possibly push for something that it was you wanted, possibly try and get access to a program that you've been after on the account, whether that be an increase in born to run allowance, marketing support, an AVS person, whatever it is, you can bring that up in those discussion pieces. In terms of costs, so if Amazon is asking as part of your negotiation to lower cost prices, I very much like to try and separate the two out. And one of the very important things to do with the cost piece is to make sure that Amazon agrees that it is for ongoing purchases only. A lot of vendor managers will say that they're not able to do that. They absolutely can. It is within their remit to make it so that it only applies going forward. The system will still act as if it's going to do it retrospectively. And what I mean by that is when you accept a price decrease on Amazon, they will apply it to all future orders, all open orders, and any stock that they are currently holding. So when they're coming in that negotiation piece and they're saying that they want that decrease, it will apply to everything, not just the going forward stock levels. So you can get your vendor manager to agree to that. And if you are somebody who does not have a vendor manager and you're just getting that pop up, I never recommend accepting the cost decreases there, because A, they'll backdate it to the start of the year, and B, they'll apply it to everything that had already gone through. So you'll be hit with some large fees at that point. It comes through as a co-op deduction known as a price claim audit, and it just gets deducted straight out. If your vendor manager's agreed that you won't have it retrospective, you are able to get that reversed. So onto cost. So this is around the operational piece that I brought up at the beginning, and also a bit on the marketing side. Improving logistics is a great way to just improve your margin without having to directly work with Amazon. So Amazon doesn't like the term MOQ. If you ask Amazon what their MOQs are, a lot of the time they'll tell you they don't support MOQs. Instead, they work with case packs, and basically they've just substituted one for the other. So with that, you're able to say to Amazon, our case pack for this is, for example, 24 units. I've seen many accounts where companies have just set that their case pack is one or two because that's how they would naturally package it. But you can tell Amazon that your case pack is higher. What this does is means that Amazon has to order in a large quantity. This cuts down the number of shipments that you have to deal with, number of individual warehouses that you have to deal with. And it also means that because Amazon is having to order in a slightly higher quantity, you're actually on lines where Amazon's not keeping it in stock as much. You're pushing up the amount of stock that they have to have at any one time. And it also cuts down your internal storage a little bit if they're taking on that additional thing there. Also cuts your warehouses, pick pack fees. So lots of things that happen there. The other piece that does is I'm sure one of the questions that will come up around profitability at some point today will be the shortages on the account and the charges that come in, the unpredictable fees effectively from Amazon. This is the best way to combat those, as well as the fewer shipments that you have to deal with, the fewer chances there are for Amazon to make mistakes in terms of which order they're receiving things against, which is what leads to most shortages, and the fewer chances for chargebacks and other issues. In terms of the marketing, efficiency is entirely the aim of the game there. It's all about constant optimization, and there are various tools. And obviously, as an agency, we offer a full service on this where marketing is one of our main key pillars as an agency, as it's one of the driving forces behind every Amazon account. It is a constantly changing landscape in Amazon, so a constant activity of keyword harvesting, analyzing the competition, seasonality trends. There's no one marketing strategy that works for every single account, and I wouldn't even say there's a single marketing strategy that works for any account for an entire year. Strategies change over the course of a year, over the course of an account's progress, and what I mean by that is when an account starts out and it's in its very much infancy, it's in its what we would call the establishment phase, and at that point you're just trying to build your initial traction. Then you go into accelerate, and that's where you're trying to grow, trying to really increase your brand presence. And then you're into defend and grow, which is where you're trying to maintain what you've already got, but still trying to climb higher. Then the final stage of yield, which is all about really trying to optimize on that profitability. And depending on where you are, determines what your ad strategy and your content strategy and all of the other areas should be. And understanding where you are on that means that you can be the most efficient in setting your kind of KPIs around your marketing. And then the last one, which is diversify strategy. So this is to cover really the pricing constraint piece, Amazon changing priorities, and is just an alternative in many ways to bypass a lot of Amazon's strategy and control on vendor. So what we are big fans of at RT7 is the hybrid model. And the hybrid model is where you operate both a seller account and a vendor account in tandem. Vendor accounts are fantastic, and in general, a vendor account should always be more profitable than a seller account. But there are a lot of advantages to having both, and a lot of advantages in general to a seller account. Vendor accounts are notoriously difficult to build initial traction on. So, when I was talking about just now in the various phases, if you're in that establishment phase, seller accounts are immensely helpful because with vendor, they want to see initial traction. They want to use that to drive their ordering going forward. While you can use things like born to run, you obviously have allowance limits. You have to put in a decent chunk of stock. Amazon's going to see slow movement, which means they're probably going to want a higher margin to be able to justify bringing it back in. If you put the product into seller, you have full discretion of how much stock you put in. You can build it up. And once it gets to a point where the demand is high enough, and I would say that demand minimum should be whatever you set a case pack in vendor to be over a 90-day period, ideally over a 30-day period. And that's because the Born to Run program, which is a good indication of how Amazon looks at kind of cycles of products, is a 90-day period. And you kind of want everything to be having at least a 1 month restocking going into vendor. The other advantages of having the seller account means that you are not trapped by vendor and you are not at their mercy when it comes to negotiations and other issues. So I've spoken to many companies before where annual terms come up, they get told they've got 2 weeks to accept it, and they're looking at it. And the reason that they just accept the terms is they've messaged Amazon, they've said, we are happy to discuss. Amazon never replies. At the end of the 2 weeks, they accept the terms because the risk to them is that they now have vendor gone and they can't afford to lose that revenue. If you have a seller account, you have a backup. You have a way of saying to them that we don't need to accept this. If vendor did disappear, or if we didn't get this price increase on this product, then we will stop supplying it because we can then put it through seller. It's effectively a backstop. And there are other elements and other parts to the kind of the hybrid strategy, but from a pure profit piece, it's that backstop and the fact that if you ever did get to a point where vendor did erode a margin on a product to a point where it's now more profitable on seller, you have the option to switch and you can work on trying to fix vendor to go back to that afterwards. And if you can't, you can just maintain it on seller. So like I say, many, many advantages to the hybrid piece there. Let's jump to the next one. Okay, so I've touched a little bit already on the fact that Amazon has been closing vendor accounts, and I know that's been a big concern for a lot of companies going forward, where they've either lost their account and they've had to pivot very, very quickly. As Amazon sends out an email and says your account will be terminated on X date, and I've not seen them really give more than 90 days notice on that. And a lot of companies going, well, am I next? Is vendor going? Lots and lots of questions and lots of concerns, and it's right to have those, and it's right to ask. I don't think vendor is going, and I don't think many experts in this area would say that vendor is disappearing. Vendor is still a very big thing for Amazon, and their direct presence on there is something that they clearly want to maintain, and that's shown by things like Amazon Basics and other areas where they're pushing on those fronts. What they are doing is a return to the original strategy that vendor was originally launched for. So vendor, when it was first created, was meant to be for direct brand relationships and for large groups that represented exclusive deals with brands. And what has happened over time is that vendor accounts have been given to other companies, vendor accounts have been transferred at various points, companies have transitioned, and you've ended up with companies that are effectively using it as more of a wholesale resale space without that kind of exclusivity built in there. And it's the exclusivity that is key that Amazon is after there. So that's a big chunk of it. The other is the two most obvious metrics, which is revenue and profitability. If accounts aren't generating enough revenue, then Amazon is closing them because it's costing them too much to service the account versus what they are making through it. And the same is true on the profitability piece. If they're not making enough themselves, then they will look to close it. And the things that kind of make up Amazon's profitability are not just the margin that goes through it. There are other elements that kind of fit into this. So that's things like if there are policy violations, they have to deal with those. If there's high return rates on accounts, they don't like to see that. Metrics such as being out of stock, or low shipments or low fulfillment, meaning that they can't reliably look to push stock to other people and fulfilling and have a line continue to grow. And then things like non-compliance within there. So any violations of things, any violations of contracts, lots of chargebacks and other things. While Amazon does have chargebacks in place to obviously recoup these things, the reason the chargebacks are there and is more of a deterrent than anything. They don't want to be seeing huge charges across accounts, because it takes up their capacity to be able to fulfill orders and to do other things within that. So what can be done to prevent it? So first and foremost, following Amazon's policy, staying within the rules, avoiding chargebacks wherever possible. There will always be some on accounts, and I know that in certain circumstances there are benefits to keeping certain chargebacks. Like I know one company, for example, they regularly get a charge for sending in oversized container boxes, and it's because it would cost them too much to split the product out. But it's a small portion of their product line, so it's a small impact to Amazon. So it's not really causing any major issues there. Performance metrics, this is a big one. Avoiding stockouts, late shipments, and high return rates. While this is obviously a challenge, Amazon gives such short delivery windows for things and is so it doesn't like to give commitments with its stock. If they're finding that they can't get stock a lot of the time, then the account just has less value to them. If they're stocking it at the wrong times of year, it just doesn't help them. That's just something that they would not want to see across an account. And it can lead to you getting lots of returns coming back and other issues. So it's not really helpful on either side. Engage with Amazon. So this really applies to the larger vendor accounts, making sure that you have a strong relationship with your vendor manager, asking them what they're looking to see on the account, if there's anything they're happy with, unhappy with, engaging with them, talking to them about promotions, seasonality, various plans, just making sure that that they know what you are trying to push. That way they can service you better as well. And again, reiterating the seller piece, have a backup plan. I would highly recommend to anybody with a vendor account, have a seller account as a backup plan. The number of companies that I spoke to where and saw via like LinkedIn groups and other things where they'd been told, oh, my vendor account is closing, and then they were reacting. Then they were trying to get a seller account set up. And for some of them, it was fine. They had one or two products they had to deal with. But for others, where they've got a 500,000, 2,000 product catalog, there's a huge amount to transition. And the big question they had to ask themselves was, would I actually even be profitable if I transitioned to seller at that point? And it's not the point you want to be looking into that, finding solutions, going, oh, I can't do FBA, I have to do SFP. It's so important to have a backup strategy now. Okay, so with the account and assuming the kept vendor account and looking at the strategies you've got, what do those strategies look like and how can they be implemented? So I know I've already mentioned this one, but it is the main thing to look at. It's the hybrid strategy. So understanding your profitability across your vendor account and your seller account is key. So you can know where it makes the most money. And more importantly, if vendor squeezes you or if seller changes their rates as they did recently, where do you make the most money? Where is it worth you pushing? And 9 times out of 10, if your vendor account is set up and managed well, your vendor account would be more profitable. But obviously, if Amazon's pushing on negotiations hard, or if you've got prices that haven't increased in 10 years, sellers obviously going to have some advantages that come in there. And it could be a temporary solution, it could be a long-term solution, and that will depend on where you are with Amazon. The other option is to expand to other marketplaces and reseller networks. We've seen a lot of companies do this over the years. This one does come with a bit of a caveat and a bit of a warning that with other marketplaces, none of them are as big as Amazon. While I love the idea of trying to diversify away, Amazon is over 50% now of e-commerce sales. The other platforms really cannot compete with it. It is important to use them and to utilize them to have those other areas of marketplaces to cut down on that dependency. And reseller networks, again, very useful, but also they come with their own issue, which is a bit of a loss of control. Where if you now make your product very easy for the reseller network in general, whether that's via wholesale, whether that's via you providing it to other large groups to put available into the market, you now have the option for other Amazon sellers to come in, compete against you on the platform, and these will be people that will be willing to make very slim margins, potentially even picking the stock up at clearance and other things, where they will come in, and the issue that you get is a large number of resellers on there. It's a race to the bottom, and in a race to the bottom, nobody wins, and you end up actually eroding your margin there. So while it's useful to have kind of that option to look at, it does come with a few caveats that it can cause some problems and issues further down the road if not managed well. So in terms of then optimizing SKUs and inventory, you have to balance having some products in Amazon where they get a decent margin in there so they're happy, not just higher revenues within there. So it is a bit of a balancing game within that. Looking at unprofitable SKUs, and that's both for yourself and Amazon, and looking at trying to forecast further ahead. So Amazon does offer a little bit in terms of forecasting, in terms of like the P90 and P70 things that they've put into the retail analytics, and I know they've started doing a few other bits in terms of PO forecasting on some of the larger accounts. But looking at your own seasonal trends, looking at what Amazon tends to order, by having more of a plan for what Amazon is likely to need over time, is going to mean that Amazon is able to have the stock there. And the overstock fees is more of a mention to if you're running the hybrid strategy, for anyone wondering what the overstock fee is there. It's also to present overage returns if Amazon ends up with just huge amounts of stock afterwards, because it's not just knowing when the stock needs to be there for you to fulfill, but if you have an account that doesn't have doesn't have an overstock allowance. And as I mentioned previously, Amazon looks at demand to justify things going forward. What we see a lot on accounts is people continue to provide stock to Amazon at the end of their seasonal period, and all that happens is they get returns later, which is bad for you, bad for Amazon, just not a great metric to have. So being aware of your own kind of seasonality piece within that, very useful so that you know when stock is needed and when stock should be held back from going into Amazon. Pricing and promotions. So pricing, uh, there's a common issue with pricing when it comes to vendor, and that's when accounts are set up and when Amazon begins to negotiate on setting up an account. They push for quite high discounts on account setup. And this leads to people thinking, well, this is what I've now got to do whenever I load a product in. And then over time, as Amazon will begin to erode that margin, as I've mentioned, and price increases are a difficult thing to get on Amazon. Firstly, if you do add products to Amazon, as in new products onto the account, you do not have to give a huge discount to Amazon. I've spoken to many people before where they were told on onboarding, Amazon needs a 30% margin, Amazon needs a 40% margin. It's not true. You can load the product in with effectively any price that is less than the ex-VAT sales price of the product. So if you're selling it for £11.99, £10 ex-VAT, you could in theory load it for £9.99. Amazon won't buy it at that stage. You would need to give them a slightly higher discount than that, but there is nothing within the system that inherently prevents you from loading it in at that price. I usually advise starting with a 5% discount or a 10% discount, so in that case, £9.50 or £9. Amazon will usually allow your initial stock to go through at that point. At later points, they will then look to try and pull that down. And that's where you've got room at that point to bring that down. But you do want to think about, is this a price that's going to be more sustainable over time? And you need to have a plan for, if this doesn't work, what is my trigger point to move it to seller? What's the price points that vendor can get to without that being an issue, and having that as effectively a line in the sand in terms of negotiation. And cost price increases, this is a good time to bring this up. It is possible to get cost price increases with Amazon. It is difficult, it's very difficult, but we have plenty of accounts that we've worked with where they have managed it and where we've helped support to get those through. There is never a guarantee of getting cost price increases through. Annual negotiation time is actually a good time to push on this, as you can sometimes get an increase to certain things while getting changes to other co-ops. So it can be a balancing act to kind of push these things together. And what you can do is say to a vendor manager, if you have one, we need this price increase and we won't supply until we get it. And that is one of the most effective strategies with vendor, is to say that you will withhold giving them the product until they actually have the price in place that you need. And I know several companies that do this, and I know one or two where they, for various internal reasons, they choose not to run a seller account. The issue they have is the listing tanks every time they do. They lose all the traction they've got. They have to build up again afterwards. But that's their choice to make, and they've managed to successfully maintain their profit, the margin on the product every time, and have the cost prices through. If you have the seller account, though, you don't have the product decreasing in the way they did, which saves you ultimately on the advertising spend, which is, of course, another element to profitability, as I mentioned previously. So the last bit I've got on the pricing and promotions bit is the monitor Amazon's pricing behavior. So with this is, you'll probably have seen this, Amazon varying the price that they sell the product for out to customers. And that can be that they go above your suggested pricing, below your suggested pricing. The thing to watch for is if they go below, they are effectively eroding the margin that they make, and they will look for a lower margin later. And if they go too high, then you get the obvious of it's less likely to convert in terms of the sale piece. In general, Amazon is a price follower rather than a price leader. So this is another advantage of one of the points further up on having the additional marketplaces, is if Amazon can see it in other places for the same price that you want them to sell it for, they will keep it around that price. And another advantage of seller is if you see them suddenly cutting the price to say, let's say stick with our £10 ex-VAT item, if they're suddenly trying to sell it for £7.99, £7, for example, you would have to give quite a decrease in your cost price to maintain that. And for products that have a premium brand presence or have a position in the market where they want to be not seen as cheap, that's obviously eroding that image and it's eroding that margin that Amazon is making. Where you see them doing that, if you have the seller account, you have the option to not continue supplying to vendor and instead put the product through seller where you have the price control. So while seller does not prevent them from fluctuating the price, it can be used as a price anchor to keep vendor in line, both from a positional point and from just a not stocking it when it goes silly point. Then increase marketing and ad efficiency. So this is just around general advertising strategy and best practices in this sense. And I could probably do the whole session just on ad efficiency and strategy, but as a very top level piece, shifting budgets to high ROI ads that drive profitable sales. Sounds simple, but it's a case of just monitoring the campaigns on a regular basis, not just looking at, oh, this one's got a good click through, or this one has a high number of impressions. While that's great at the early stages of a brand, is looking at the ultimate return on investment, so your ROAS or ACOS if you prefer to look at your ACOS, turning off unprofitable sales and unprofitable ads, sorry, pumping the money towards the ones that work. And the caveat to that is certain campaigns will have a limit to how much you can put behind it. You can't put all of your money just behind your highest ROI advertising type. You've got to have different ones in there, but it's just constant monitoring, turning off the ones that don't work, improving and optimizing the ones that do, regular keyword harvesting, and on a very granular level, looking at the ASIN level profitability, which keywords are working, which keywords aren't. And negative keywords is a fundamental part of that we see across accounts is often not done. Negative keywords is one of the biggest main improvements that we would look at across advertising. A plus and brand store. So this is more on the organic pieces. A plus has a big increase to conversion, and it doesn't have to be the greatest A plus content for every single product and brand, depending on kind of the type of product you've got or the type of offering. I mean, if you're selling a hammer versus selling a mobile phone, for example, you don't need huge content to convince somebody to buy a hammer, but you do need a lot of detail to convince someone to have a mobile phone. So knowing kind of what your demographic is kind of gives you the idea behind how much convincing, which is what your A plus content in your brand store should do, is encourage people to trust your brand, encourage people to trust the product, and also look at opportunities for things like upselling. And for when people go to look for things, they're not just searching for Amazon, but they're now coming back and looking for you. And the last piece, organic sales cannibalization. So this is another common problem that comes up for advertising. With that first point of the higher ROI, you can get a very good ROI on an ad campaign, or what looks like an incredibly good ROI on an ad campaign, but what you're actually doing is cannibalizing your organic sales. So if you find that when you are advertising certain campaigns, you see that your total sales aren't massively increasing or even staying the same or potentially going down, is a sign that what you are doing is effectively picking up the people that would have already found the page. And that could be you're advertising on the terms where you already rank really highly organically on those pieces. And there are advantages to advertising on those so that you push other people out, but it's one of the things to watch for, that you aren't just paying for the sales you'd make anyway. Okay, so what can we do to help maximize this profitability? So account optimization is the first one, and this is definitely the one that kind of drives all of them. Because if the account isn't optimized and if the account isn't there, then nothing else is really going to help or make a big enough difference. So cost negotiation, so securing better terms, looking at why you're getting chargebacks, looking at the various fees that come in outside of what you should be getting, and the price that Amazon is paying for the products, and having a firm negotiation strategy and being able to push back. And this is something that as an agency we support our clients in doing. This is the main driving force, because if you don't have this is your foundation of profitability within the account. Everything else is just plastering over and is just smaller optimization pieces. This is the main bedrock that makes up the health of your profitability. Big help to that is, of course, the hybrid strategy, as I know I've mentioned a few times already. But by combining those two strategies, you can create a far more robust profitability model. You can have a floor in the form of your seller account. You can have backup strategies for if things go wrong. You have a launch platform for anything new that is coming in. And you just have a way of being able to manage and hold Amazon there. And the last one, which is the inventory efficiency. So this is the one that's more within your control, where you can set your case packs. And one that I actually haven't touched on with this is for accounts that have like high volume sales. Let's say that you've set your case pack with Amazon that they're ordering 20, 24 of something per time, but you're selling 500, 1,000, 2,000 units every single week to them. The thing that you need to look at there is called a pallet code. And with that, you are able to say to Amazon, if you take a full pallet of stock, so let's say, let's stick with our hammer that I mentioned earlier. Let's say you're selling a pack of 24 hammers to Amazon for £10, and you're getting orders to 20 different warehouses every single week. Your warehouse is having to put these out as individual boxes. What you can say to Amazon, if you take 2,000 hammers on a pallet, we'll deliver that to a single location, and rather than paying us £10 for the hammer, we'll charge you £9.90, for example. You can give a fairly small discount within this level. Usually what we see is when agreeing on pallet pricing is about a 2% discount off of what the standard cost would be. But for yourselves, that's an obvious increase that you are now sending out. In our scenario there, 24 hammers to, I think I said 2,000 on a pallet. So that's something like 80 something boxes. I'm not going to do the exact math, but 80 something boxes that you now don't have to send out individually. You're now able to send out as a pallet. You get the optimized shipping, and you also have less orders for Amazon to mess up on, less orders for you to track in terms of chargebacks, in terms of shortages, in terms of other issues that can come up. And you've just cut down all of the logistics to that point. So then back onto advertising and marketing. Reducing wasted spend is really the thing, and focusing on that ROI. And if it's that you're finding, it's deep diving and understanding what's going on with your campaigns. So if you're seeing that you've got really high advertising going through, but your organic's drying up, like I say, it's probably cannibalization. If it's that you're seeing huge click-throughs, but people ultimately aren't buying the product, is it that you've got is it that people are clicking through expecting a completely different product, in which case it's probably that you haven't got negative keywords? Is it that they're clicking through but there's not enough there to convince them? Is it that they're clicking through and then seeing a competitor ad on your listing? There's all of these things to kind of go through, and there's no one size fits all for this. And it's a regular activity that needs to be looked through to be able to say why is this not working? What is the thing that's going on there? And just optimizing that ad spend as much as possible to get as much of a return on investment for every pound you put in. And then the A plus content and brand store. So this is where you can effectively make money without spending more money. So this is where it's the convincing piece. So what is it that when they click through to the product, what's convincing them to buy, what's convincing them to come back? If let's say, for example, they come into the product and they wanted, I'm going to stick with a hammer because I've mentioned it already. Let's say they came in and they wanted a hammer, but they specifically wanted a claw hammer, for example. And if you've got that in a variation, or you've got an A plus content that shows that you have that in there, and you've got a brand store that takes them through, and they've got these different areas they can navigate. If you've got a variation with the A plus content to support, they don't have to go back to search to find what they want. They can click through on your product. If they go back to search, there's obviously the chance they find a competitor, they find something else. Once you've got a person on your page, it's about the conversion, and it's looking at what you can do to further optimize that, which increases your organic sales but also increases your conversion on your paid sales. And pricing and promotion strategy. So this is, I know it's kind of probably a bit odd to talk about promotion strategy in line with profitability, but it's about how to get the most out of your promotions and make it so your promotion isn't eating into your profitability. So by aligning pricing and promotion strategy, let's say you've got a highly seasonal product. Let's say 90% of your sales happen over let's say the Christmas period, for example, but you still want to be able to maintain sales throughout that period. And when you get to that point where Amazon is ordering in, say, a pallet or two pallets, and you can give them a better margin, you can afford to give a lower sales price for the product. You could run the product, say, £15 most of the year, but run then a coupon, a voucher, a promotion strategy at that point where it's seasonally impactful, so that your product is now more competitively priced, increases your sales point on there, but you've not had to give Amazon an overall lower price. So you can align your promotion strategy with the overall strategy of the account. That's just one example of kind of how you can tie that in. The other that you can do is if you've got products in a variation. So let's say again, just sticking with the hammer analogy, let's say that you've got claw hammers, mallets, sledgehammers, all in one variation. I know it's not a fantastic example of a variation, but let's say you've got those three products together and you want to run a 10% discount. You don't have to run the discount, and I generally don't recommend running the discount on every single one of those products. A lot of people go in looking for promotions and even can find the product due to a promotion, and a promotion will increase your sales across the whole range. So you could put one product on promotion and then cycle through a week later, do another one. And then you've got two products being sold at full price that are enjoying the benefit of further exposure from the fact that the one that's on promotion is going to be getting more sales, so driving you up the sales rank, and from people coming in and going, well, it's a shame that what I want isn't on sale, but they buy it anyway because they came through and they saw the promotion initially. So there's just various bits that can be done there to just optimize that profitability so you're not giving away everything in one go. And ultimately, and I cannot say this last point enough, data driven strategy. Everything needs to be data driven. Amazon is a very data heavy platform and they make it quite difficult sometimes, I know, to go through and look at what those things are. And that's they split out the co-ops, they split out your returns, they split out your chargebacks, all of these different areas. And even on seller where they've got 15, 20 different fees these days for various things that you can be charged for. It does make it difficult, but it makes it even more important to know your true profitability for things, to know where you are leaking money, to know where things aren't necessarily making you money. And it's surprising there are companies we deal with where they don't know what their true profitability on Amazon is and how much they are sometimes losing on products or how little they are making in certain areas. And by understanding that, you can begin to start to tighten things up, improve your efficiency, optimize, and see where you are trying to head. And it really has to be on a product and SKU level. It's got to be that you are looking at a very ASIN level profitability. While Amazon is obviously a very holistic platform where you have to look overall across everything, but with profitability, you have to boil it down to this product at this point is making this and looking at what can be done for that one individual thing. And last but definitely not least, AI and automation, especially with larger accounts, especially with larger revenue amounts and higher advertising. It is becoming impossible. In fact, it has been impossible for a while now to do that purely as an individual human. AI and automation is your friend here. There are plenty of softwares out there. We as an agency use several. I do not believe in giving AI or automation pure control over any bit of Amazon because it is far too easy for it to go wrong, especially around advertising. I highly, highly, highly recommend against pure AI systems for advertising. They will eventually trip over themselves and go wrong. It's always better to have a human in the mix. There should be, and we as an agency put this into practice, AI and automation to do things like dynamic bids and to be able to run and manage the advertising within set parameters while monitored closely by a human periodically. But ultimately, those are now unfortunately driving factors within profitability that mean you cannot be competitive in the market without them. This is just some of the various clients that we work with, and I think this is where Jack's probably going to take over and talk through this part.
No, thanks, Stephen. Wow, a lot there. A lot of interesting insights as well. I honestly feel like that kind of content that you're covering is really not available, or you've got to dig to find that online. So some really invaluable information there. So thank you very much. We're going to move into any questions. I can't see, not sure we've got anything in at the moment, but now's the opportunity if anyone wants to ask any questions. Stephen, did you have any, was there any questions that we had posed that we wanted to answer?
I haven't seen any questions come through, sorry, no.
Okay, cool. No problem. Well, we'll give everyone a couple of minutes, see if any questions come through. Otherwise, if not, we can leave it there. Okay, I think we'll end it there.
We've just had a question come in.
Oh, have it?
Yeah. What is key to consider when opening a seller account alongside our vendor account? Okay, so I'm assuming I make an assumption with this that you're concerned that Amazon will not like you having both. Um, that firstly, there's no real issues there. You can have both. Amazon doesn't massively mind that. There's no real problems there. The thing to consider is it worth is it worth it from a profitability standpoint now, or is it a backup plan for later? So what I would recommend doing there is absolutely open it, have the thing open. You'll want to switch it to a professional selling account because you will get several advantages from doing that, but it does have a cost, £25 a month plus VAT. Um, but it's knowing what you plan to use it for. Just opening it doesn't give you a huge amount. You'd want to open it, add your products to it, but you need to look at your individual profitability. So looking at the fees that would be associated with those products. If you're planning to go FBA or seller fulfilled prime or just FBM, knowing what the costs would be around that. That allows you to have the products, even if it's just saved in the catalog, ready to be deployed if vendor did go wrong. So knowing, do I need to add £1 because of the additional seller fees? Am I actually slightly more profitable on certain things due to FBA? Can I not do FBA because my products are massively bulky or my products are below £10 or the FBA fees are too high? Knowing various things like that in advance means you can plan and be ready to use the seller account if it becomes like necessary and needed. And things like if you need to run SFP, knowing that in advance means you can go through the trial period, have the account doing that, even if it's on a small number of SKUs, ready to transition if you did move more things across.
Thank you, Stephen. Give us a thumbs up if that answers your question there. If there's any other follow-up questions from that, feel free to put it in the chat now and we can answer live.
Thank you, Greg. Well, to run promotions ads and be brand registered virus. Okay, yes. So you've got brand registry set up from, I'm guessing from this question, it's linked to your vendor account. So yes, you can absolutely link brand registry through to seller. Highly recommend doing that as well. And you can have brand registry attached to both. It's actually slightly easier to attach brand registry to seller than it is to vendor, because with vendor, you have to get the vendor manager to do the mapping. But with seller, you're actually just able to assign it through the brand registry portal. And in terms of the promotions and ads, very good question and a very good one around profitability as well. In that, if you put products into seller and you put products into vendor and they're effectively competing against each other, it can cause additional profitability challenges, especially if you're trying to advertise because you've got if they're flipping back and forth on the buy box. So again, sticking with that hammer, let's say you stick it at £10 on vendor, £10 on seller, and they're both on FBA. Amazon's going to see a very similar offering to both, and they're going to change around who is winning the buy box. And that causes your ads to stop and start, which decreases their success and increases your costs. So having a pricing strategy there where if you're running it on both, I usually recommend just offsetting the price, making seller slightly more expensive. And then it's only if vendor runs out of stock that seller then kicks in. But yes, you can absolutely run promotions and advertising on seller. And if you're driving any particular SKUs through there, I would highly recommend doing so. And then I see
We've
we've
got
got another.
another question as well there,
Yep. What are the
from
most common
Bear.
charges in brackets hidden that vendor account holders are confronted with? Excellent question. So there's a couple of ones that come up. So the common charges that I'll go through the common ones and I'll go through how some are hidden on top of that and even within that. So the common charges are your co-op fees, the initial discount that you give to Amazon, but I don't really see that as a charge because it's just they're now buying it at a different price. So co-op fees, returns, chargebacks, shortages, those and that's the various ones that they will put in place. Where they kind of put in the hidden fees, shortages are certainly one of their more hidden fees. While they do tell you that there's a shortage, one of the things they do that makes it very difficult to track them is they archive invoices where they've part paid them. They archive the remaining shortage in the system after about 6 months, so you can't see it. Chargebacks are not particularly well presented and only have a very short dispute window, so that can make it difficult to appeal and track those. Returns, they split those out into various different returns. That's one of the biggest issues of tracking returns is they don't give very easy to download reports across those. The other area is kind of hidden fees. Co-op fees actually have a hidden component to them where they can be overbilled, where the co-ops are based on the quantity of units Amazon receives, or at least are meant to be. And the issue that happens there is that where they put in a shortage and they say, oh, we only received 5, not 10 items, they will often build a co-op for if they had received 10 items. And on a similar part to that, if you've sent in against two different orders, 5 on one, and sorry, two POs, both meant to get 10 units, and one receives 5, one receives 15. And this is what I meant about Amazon mismatching where they receive the stock. You'll receive chargebacks for that, but you will also get, in certain cases, Amazon will charge the co-op on if they'd received 10 on one, but on the fact that they received 15 on the other. So you can be overbilled in those areas. And the shortages and the overages piece around those recoverables is and reimbursable aspects from Amazon. That's really where I'm kind of talking about those hidden fees. It's where Amazon doesn't pay out for all of the stock that they've received. There are other charges they put in around, like I mentioned, the price claim piece. So where you agree to lower a price of Amazon, they will put in something called a price claim, where they will deduct that money against the PO and they can do price claim audits. There's a lot of areas where they can do this retrospectively. Another example of one they've done, while it's not hidden, they do produce a co-op agreement for it. I don't think people notice it. Is with Born to Runs now for sorry, not Born to Runs, bulk buys, where Amazon does not receive all of the stock required. They've got a new agreement that's actually kicking in to take that discount off other POs, which I very much see as a hidden charge because they do not present all of the data needed to work it out. Another question has come through. How can the algorithm work best for me? That's a very open-ended question. I'm not sure. I'll give a go at answering that, but there's a
You
lot of
need a bit
areas.
more
Yeah,
specific on that.
I'll give a wide kind of like approach to it in that the way to kind of have the algorithm work for you is drive product sales up. So that's a combination of using seller for launch, vendor for maintained profitability, having uh, promotion strategies that kind of kick in, looking at your seasonal data, running promotions in advance of seasonality. There's a lot of different things in there that kind of tick that flywheel along. And it's understanding how your products fit within Amazon and knowing where to kind of push on the levers. Like I said, there's a lot in there to unpack, and it would really depend on a few more specifics. Another
Mm.
question, considering launching a product into Amazon that we already have distributed with other retailers, we're concerned Amazon may drive the price down. Should we launch via vendor or seller? What are the pros/con for each channel? Um, that is a good question. You've put key retailers, which makes me think it's a problem if vendor does deviate from the price. You can never fully control the price that vendor is going to sell a product for. So if that's an absolute must-have thing, do it through seller. And for your initial launch, do it through seller because you will get better initial traction by doing it that way because you control the stock, you control when it's in, all of the other things there. Build that stock up. Sorry, build the sales rank up. When it gets to a point where it is moving regularly, then assuming that you can cope with the possibility of Amazon shifting the price, because it is possible, then move it to vendor. Use Born to Run to get the stock in there. Vendor will then use the fact that it's got the stock and selling plus the previous demand to then carry on future orders with it. And you can go out through there, and you just had to very closely monitor if Amazon did move that price, but it is a risk that they could.
Cool. I think that's about it. Some great questions there, though.
Mm, yeah, good ones.
We're nearly out of time. But I think we're all done. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Stephen.